Good afternoon and welcome back, ladies, gents and Pikachus, to another episode, a breakdown and analysis of the Quran of the Muslims! Yes, we are breaking it down verse by verse once again, turning those verses into factual, logical statements in English that we can understand, so we can figure out who or what is Allah, what is his intention and his purpose, and more importantly, what does this mean for you and I as non-believers in the world today? So before I start, as I always do, I'm going to tell you now, if you have any doubts as to my factual accuracy and you want to argue with any of the statements I'm about to make, please feel free to buy and read one of these from any good bookshops or from Amazon, and once you have done that, you will figure out that every word I'm about to say to you now and have said in the past is 100% true and factual to what Muslims actually believe and what Allah has said in his own words. So, let's carry on. Now, if you've been keeping up with the series and you watched the last one, you will remember that we went through some of the conditions under which Muslims are put under by Allah, how they are going to get to their end times prophecy without punishment, and this includes a lot of rules, Sharia, that they have to follow, and the end time result is that they have to kill the Jews and Christians in a certain way, otherwise they are naughty boys and they will never see the end times and will be punished severely by Allah in his mercy and wisdom. So, with that in mind, let's crack on. 153. War during Ramadan is a grave offence. Only paganism in this period is a worse offence. Any who prevent to fail to walk the perfect path of worship to Allah are guilty of tumult and oppression. These things are worse even than death and shall be punished. Until you kill these pagans dead, they will never stop this sin and will only prevent your path to righteousness, such as they will become the companions of fire forever. So, a nice quick start to this one, I find. So let's break this down. Bearing in mind, the last thing we went to was the conditions of how the Christians and Jews, even though they look like they're having a good time, are actually brainwashed, mind-controlled evil devils, and you shouldn't be like them or try and talk to them or like them in any way. You should definitely want to kill them. And the reason you want to kill them, O Muslims, is if you don't, and you don't worship enough and do the end times genocidal prophecy, i.e. rubbing out everyone else, then you are evil and bad. So after you've done that, you have to do Ramadan as well. Give all your money to the mosque and pray to Allah and fast. So that's why we're talking now about what happens during the fasting in relation to killing the non-believers. So he starts off, war during Ramadan is a grave offence. So what he's saying is, try not to kill anyone while you're fasting in your mosque, guys. You know, try and keep the place nice and tidy. But if you see pagans during this period and they're worshipping someone else, they're blocking the path to righteousness. They're stopping Allah's worship being developed all over the world. So even though you're in their country as an invader and you've just freshly killed a bunch of them, and you're supposed to be fasting in your peaceful Ramadan period, if you see them doing anything else apart from Allah worship during Ramadan, fucking go over there and kill them dead. So says Allah in the book. He carries on. If they prevent or fail to walk the perfect path of worship to Allah, they are guilty of tumult and oppression. These things are worse even than death and must be punished. So what Allah is saying here is any who prevent or fail to walk the perfect path of worship to Allah by reading this book and doing the Allah Akbar, all that stuff, they're actually committing a sin that is worse than killing someone, and leaving them alive is worse than death. So because they are guilty of tumult, causing trouble for you, even though they're over there and they don't even know you're here, they haven't even fucking spotted you there, because they're not worshipping Allah during Ramadan, go over and kill them because they're causing tumult and oppression. Them not worshipping your God over there on their own peacefully is oppressing you. Don't put up with oppression because it's worse than death. They are being worse to you than it would be if they killed you. They're treating you worse than it would be to kill you. So go over there and kill them, end their oppression by chopping off their head in the words of Allah in the book. That's what he's telling you. And then he says these things are worse even than death and must be punished. Until you kill these pagans, O Muslims, until you kill them, they will never stop this great sin of just being happy over there and not worshipping Allah. And not only that, they will prevent your path to righteousness, such as they will become companions of fire for eternity. So, what Allah is saying here in his lovely, grand, wise and merciful manner is that them over there, those evil pagan Jews and Christians and atheists, because it's Ramadan and they're not worshipping Allah, They're oppressing you, O Muslims. They're insulting you last time. Now they're oppressing you. You've got every right to go over and kill them. It's not even a sin. Cut their heads off, loot their stuff, give it to the mosque. All good, no harm, no foul. In the words of Allah. Legit? Fucking no. But let's carry on. 154. Hope ye only for Allah's mercy, though ye struggle. On gambling and alcohol for your pains, say, the sin is far worse, the profit is not. For they will spend beyond their needs and their means. There is no sin in the provision of alcohol or gambling for others, only sin in taking it upon yourself, O Muslim. End of verse. So, a very compact verse, but I feel like there's a lot to unpack in here, especially when he mentions gambling and alcohol as terrible sins. So what he's saying here is, hope ye only for Allah's mercy, while you're having such a terrible time, and then you're in Ramadan and these evil arseholes over there are oppressing you because they're not worshipping Allah over there. You're over here trying to do Ramadan, and those cheeky bloody bastards over there, those Jews and Christians, aren't even worshipping Allah during you doing Ramadan here. So that's a great sin. Go and kill them, cut their heads off and take their money. While that's happening, if any of you die or become injured, or you're not enjoying this as much as you should be, hope only for Allah's mercy, i.e. while you're doing that, Allah's going to make you better afterwards. Though ye struggle on gambling and alcohol for your pain, so Allah is saying to you, the Muslim who's reading the book, while you're in pain, if you think about gambling or alcohol, don't dare have fun to try and get away from your shitty, painful existence. If you think about gambling or alcohol, say to that Muslim who's doing that, the sin is far worse than the profit. The profit's okay. For these guys will spend far more than their needs and their means. And what that means is, if I'm reading this correctly, you're not allowed to do gambling or alcohol, O Muslims, when you're in pain. But what you're allowed to do is buy lots of alcohol and offer lots of gambling games, as long as you don't put money on it yourself. Invite those guys in for gambling, get all their money, then when they go home, then kill them. If I'm reading this correctly. So let's just finish off the reading to make sure I haven't got this wrong. He continues, there is no sin in the provision of alcohol or gambling for others, only sin in you taking it upon yourself, O Muslim. So that clears it up for us all. This is Allah directly saying to his Muslims, don't you dare drink alcohol or do gambling, it's a terrible sin. Just have a shop that sells alcohol and offers gambling games and sell them to others. Definitely don't do it yourself though, even though your stock is completely alcohol and gambling and people are coming in and asking you about it and saying what's the best alcohol, and you're saying, oh yeah, this one, this Bacardi, that's quite a good one, and you're selling them scratch cards. As long as you're not doing any of that stuff yourself and you're only filling your whole shop with it and selling it to these guys, that's fine. And the reason it's fine is because they'll spend beyond their means and needs, you'll get all that money, they'll get all the sin, everything's okay. Once again, no harm, no foul, in the words of Allah. And I've got to say, as a person who is an ex-addict and an ex-gambling addict who used to drink rather a lot, this is one of the most evil things I've read. This is almost worse than the whole head chopping, enslaving the women and bullying and murdering everyone and stealing. Because this is like Allah being horrible to his Muslims under the guise of being nice and friendly. Allah's making out here, oh yeah, because I'm so graceful and wise and merciful, O Muslims, I'm going to ban you from alcohol and gambling, but I'm going to instruct you to have a house full of alcohol and gambling, but you're not allowed to do any of it, but you have to sit there all day talking about it and selling it to the non-believers before you go and kill them tomorrow to get all that money that they haven't any longer got because they've spent it with you. This is absolutely insane. And it even says, the sin is worse, the profit is not. So it's like the sin in gambling and alcohol is enjoying them. That's explicitly what Allah is saying here. The sin in alcohol and gambling is fun. Don't have fun, O Muslims. Only sell the fun to others and then they can have all the sin and you can have all the money. It's fine. There is no sin in provision of alcohol or gambling for others, only for you, O Muslim. So this is completely clear. This is one of the most clear examples that Allah has said something to his Muslims. And the thing he's saying to his Muslims is, those dirty evil Jews and sinners over there that we're going to kill later, before we kill them, let's sell them a bunch of sinful alcohol and gambling, which we have a massive store of, but let's not partake in it ourselves because that would be disgusting and bad. So it's disgusting and bad for us, but it's okay for them because they're disgusting and sinful already. As long as they're paying us for it, we win on both ends. It's all good, and then we'll kill them later and it will all be fine. That's what this says. That is terrible. Allah, you are a naughty boy. Let's carry on. 155. Allah gives you a bearing on righteousness. With the orphans, say, take them with you and mix them into your duties, and your affairs will be with them. But be mindful, Allah knows all ye do, so fear only Allah and don't get into mischief. Right, I feel that this one definitely needs some breaking down, because it isn't very well defined. But I think I know what Allah's getting at here, and I can match it up with a lot of historical and recent evidence of criminal cases, especially in this country here, relating to the actions of Islamic Quran worshippers. Let's go. So he starts off by saying, Allah gives you a bearing on righteousness with the orphans. So what he's saying is, Allah is going to lead you to be righteous while you're doing this fucking pointless thing that you don't understand why it's righteous. And the thing that you're doing, O Muslims, that you don't understand why it's righteous but Allah's making you do, is take with you the young boys who are orphans and mix them into your duties and have your affairs with them. Now, I could be reading into this wrong, you be the judge, O reader, but if I'm reading the Quran of the Muslims correctly, and I think that I am, Allah is saying here, you see these orphan boys that have no fathers, their father just died on the battlefield, that are completely traumatised and terrified and anxious for their futures, rather than them just laying about the mosque getting in the way all day and eating our food and spending our money, take these little blighters with you, O Muslim, when you're off killing the non-believers and raiding them. Take the orphans with you, mix them into your duties, i.e. have them doing some of the killing and the raping, and your affairs will be with them. Don't know what he means by affairs with the little boys, but I got a fair idea if I know Allah and I know the Quran of the Muslims and the people who worship this, so I will say no more and just leave you to use your imaginations on why they would have affairs with little boys and take them with them after they've been traumatised and they have no father to defend them. Who knows? But be mindful, Allah knows all you do, so fear only Allah and get into no mischief. Allah's literally saying here, I'm watching you, you dirty perverts, while you're taking these orphans off to kill and rape people, and they have no one to protect you, and you're mixing them into your duties and having your affairs with them. Don't get into any mischief, Allah will be watching you. This is like the clearest example of Allah going, phew, nothing to see here. We're just taking these young boys with us into war, just in case we get, some time off and we want to relax, because we're not allowed alcohol or gambling. We're certainly not allowed to cavort with the pagans and evil non-believers over there. We can't just hang around and have fun. So what we're going to do in Allah's commands, in our righteous pathway, we're going to take these orphans with us to war, kill and rape a load of people, and then in our break time, when we're not allowed to smoke, drink or gamble, we're going to have affairs with these young boys. It's going to be totally righteous because Allah says so. If you don't do it, you're not worshipping enough and you are simple and bad. So says Allah in the book. Oh, you know what? The less said about this verse, the fucking better. That is... Anyway, let's carry on. 156. Marry not a pagan woman. So let me get this right, Allah. You've just told me about your dirty, dodgy, undefined, undescribed, mixing orphan boys in with your duties and having your affairs with them. So I'm thinking, what are you doing with these poor boys, you perverts? Like, I don't like the idea of that, and I don't like the way you've written it. It sounds extremely like you are bringing those boys with you to use as a product of relief, if you like, after you've done the raping and killing, before you go back to your mosque. And the only reason the mosque is getting rid of them, they don't care what happens to these orphans, it's just they don't want them hanging around eating food. So that's one thing. Then the next verse you immediately go on to, Allah's going to talk about marriage now. So you went from young boys being abused, mixed in with your affairs, and having your affairs with them. You went from talking about young boys to whether you're going to marry pagan women. Why would you do that? Why would you mix those... Anyway, let's carry on before I get pissed off and start saying things I'll regret. 156. Marry not a pagan woman, lest you make her a slave and make her believe first. For a Muslim slave is worth better than a pagan woman, even if she cause your lust. Marry not your son and your daughters to any pagans, nor any slave, for the pagans only beckon you towards sin and fire. Now, this is going to be good. Let's break this down. So, right after we've had the affairs with the little boy orphans, when we're killing and raping people, mixing them in with our duties to get them out of the way of the mosque so they don't cost any money, and they pick up the ways of war and sin and horrible lifestyle, which, by the way, remember what Allah said? Do you really know the difference between good and bad? Maybe little boys going into raping and pillaging and war and seeing all this horrible stuff after their father has died and then being mixed into the duties of war like Islamic soldiers and being having affairs with them. Maybe you just think that's bad and it's actually really good. Remember, Allah knows, you know nothing. He said so before. It's all in here. If you don't believe me, read this. Allah says, I'm not Allah. Allah did say that. So with that in mind, he's now saying, don't marry any of these pagan women we're about to enslave. You know, when we're killing all the non-believer Jews and Christians and enslaving their wives and their children, don't marry any of these scum unless you first make them a slave and then make them believe in Islam. If they become an Islamic slave, then they're virtuous and you can marry them. That's what it says. It goes on. For a Muslim slave is worth better than a pagan woman, even if she cause your lust. So what Allah is definitely saying here, and I am definitely reading this right, Allah is saying capturing a slave, forcing her to be an Islamic slave and worship Allah, even though she doesn't really, she is more virtuous than a normal, respectable, unmarried woman who doesn't worship Allah. So if you think about it, if you're a raiding party and you already have no respect for these guys, you're already taking their women and children as slaves anyway, why not just enslave the pretty one? Then she can be your wife and also your slave. Allah says it's cool, it's righteous, and if you don't do it, you are a bad Muslim. That's what this means. And then they round out the verse by saying, marry not your son and daughters to any pagans, nor any slaves, for the pagans only beckon you towards sin and fire. So this is the clearest example of Allah saying, Muslims, these guys over here, don't do any of the stuff they're doing. Even when you take these women as slaves and then you make them your wife, if they try and make you less aggressive and less angry and less hateful, fucking no, don't do that, because they're trying to beckon you towards their sinful ways and you'll end up in the fire. So don't be nice and accept their niceness and their kindness and their forgiving, merciful ways. That's bad and sinful. Carry on raping, killing, murdering and having affairs with young boys. That is the way to avoid the fire and not be sinful. Allah says so, so it must be true. He says so in the book, so it must be true. Let's carry on. And then we get to the final verse, 157. Do not visit with nor commit time to women and their activities, for they pollute your minds with filth and sin. Only when they have penanced and covered up their flesh should they be pure enough to be approached by you. Allah instructs you to guide them in your ways. End of verse. So, breaking it down, after we've gone through how you can enslave the prisoners of war and make them, you know, your slave and force them to be Islamic, then you can marry them. And that's actually better than marrying someone who's unmarried. So it's better to take someone else's wife away from them, kill them, force that woman to be your slave, force her into the Islamic worship, then marry her, despite the fact that she fucking hates you. That is better than an unmarried person who just doesn't worship Allah. Not only that, do not visit or commit time to women and their activities, for they pollute your mind with filth and sin. So Allah is blatantly saying here, keep away from all women, apart from the prisoners of war that you're going to take and enslave and force into Islam. This is absolutely disgusting. And then he says, do not commit time to women and their activities, for they pollute your minds with filth and sin. So it's like, don't look at women, because you'll start having lusty thoughts about them and you won't be able to control yourself, and then you'll jump on them and you'll be sinful. So don't do that. Just capture the fucking pagan women and make them your wives. Then it's not sinful. Absolutely disgusting. And then he goes on to say, only when they have penanced and covered up their flesh should they be pure enough to be approached by you. So literally, even Muslim unmarried women who are nice and pure in the words of Allah, you can't talk to them unless they're completely covered head to toe and they've penanced. Which, what penance is not defined in here, but I did a little Google search. What penance is hardship. So what that means is like fasting and prayer and punishing yourself to relieve yourself of sin, in the words of Allah. So once your woman is completely starving, hungry, covered head to toe so you can't see her, and miserable and in silence, only then is she pure enough to be approached by you. She's the disgusting one, not you, O Muslim. Allah instructs you to guide them to your ways. So once you have this miserable, enslaved, poor, starving, hungry, bullied woman who's covered head to toe and cannot speak to you, then she's pure enough for you to approach. And the thing to do, O Muslim, is to instruct her in your ways. So don't let her do her womanly activities and sinful, filthy crap that she was doing earlier that you were told not to go near. No, you tell her what to do, and that makes her good, in the words of Allah. And that's the end of our reading. So, unfortunately, ladies, gents and Pikachus, this is like one of the only videos where I'm pissed off at the end of it and not in a good mood. So, the summary of our reading, let's go through it. Killing people during Ramadan is a grave offence, is the first thing he says, unless they're not Muslims and they're not bowing to Allah. So actually, killing people during Ramadan is not a grave offence. Killing each other during Ramadan is a grave offence. Killing everyone else is required. So during Ramadan, Allah is saying, you must kill the non-believers during Ramadan, and the reason is because they're not worshipping Allah, prostrating themselves and reading the Quran. They're not worshipping enough, and that means during Ramadan, you fucking kill them. So that's the first thing. And it also says until you kill them, they're never going to stop this horrible oppressive sin they're doing on you by just not being like you. So even though they're over there minding their own business and you're over here doing Ramadan, they're oppressing you, and that's why you're going to go and kill them. Victim blaming, cry bully bullshit. You heard it here first. Allah is inciting violence against purely peaceful, non-oppressive people and then calling them oppressors. Where have we seen that before? Palestine? Who fucking knows? Let's carry on. Then he goes on, hope ye for only Allah's mercy through your struggle. Don't even think about it with gambling and alcohol, Muslims. You're not allowed any. But in a kind of roundabout way you are, because you have to buy all the alcohol and all the gambling and then open a shop with it and sell it all to these guys so you can get all their money. Now correct me if I'm wrong, but a person who owns a shop full of alcohol and scratch cards, who is selling them for a profit and has spare ones, isn't going to not have any alcohol on scratch cards, are they? So even though Allah says don't do it, it's going to happen. And I notice at the end of this verse, there's none of this Allah's watching you, Allah knows all things. So clearly, as long as you are owning a shop full of alcohol and gambling scratch cards and you're selling it to these non-believers and raking all their money for them, and it specifically says, for they will spend beyond their needs and means, so you are making these guys bankrupt through getting them addicted to scratch cards and alcohol on purpose so you can take all their money from them, the profit is good. So the between the line things here is you can have a couple of bottles and you can have a few scratch cards as long as you're making profit. Fucking terrible. Allah knows all you do. And then he goes on to the bit about the young boys. It's like, you see these orphans that we made yesterday when we went to war and all the fathers got killed, and all their stuff and loot came back to the mosque, but the soldiers lay on the battlefield dead, and all their kids are now orphans. You, remaining soldiers, have to take those orphans with you so they can learn to be just like their fathers and do the raping and killing and replace the dead guys. While you have them, mix them into your duties and have your affairs with them. They're your brethren, you know, just treat them like you would anyone else. Apart from they're not like anyone else, they're fucking children in trauma with no fathers and they're orphans. Disgusting. Then it goes on to say who you can marry and who you can't, i.e. you can't marry anyone apart from a slave woman you've just pillaged and raped from there, whose family you just killed. So you can enslave a woman who makes you lusty and make her your wife, as long as you force her to be Islamic first before you force her to be your wife. And this is better than an unmarried woman who doesn't worship Allah. So you can make the woman worship Allah by enslaving her, forcing her to do it. Then you can forcibly marry her and it's fine. But don't let your son or daughter do that, or marry any pagan or any slave, for these pagans only beckon you towards sin and fire. Unbelievable. And then the last bit is, Do not commit your time to women and their activities, for they pollute your minds with filth and sin. When you're looking at these lusty maidens and they're making you horny, O Muslims, it's their fucking fault. What they need to do is penance. Wear the head-to-toe burqa so you can't see their flesh, and then and only then, when they've starved and done prayer and fasting, only then are they pure enough for you to approach them. Even though I said a minute ago you shouldn't be approaching them, now I'm saying as long as they're in pain and miserable and starving and covered head to toe, then you can approach them, and it's completely okay. And by the way, when they're pure enough for you to approach them, Allah instructs you to approach them and guide them in your ways. End of reading. So we can see Allah has no respect for women or children, sees them as property of the soldiers. And actually the children, orphans, are being sent out to become like soldiers and are being used for a bit of light relief on the side when they're being mixed in with the duties, and Muslims are having the affairs with them. And Allah doesn't say he knows and he's watching at the end of that one, only at the end of the one with the gambling and the alcohol, which they're not using, of course. No, we're definitely not drinking any alcohol and doing our own scratch cards. We're purely and simply just providing the sins to the non-believers for profit, and that means we're righteous. And that's the end of this video, so awful. But I hope you enjoyed listening to that and you had fun thinking about the iniquitous scumbag tactics of Allah in his Quran of the Muslims, and the way they're going to destroy and pillage and rape everybody else and destroy their culture. And that's the end of this video, so I'll see you in the next one. Have a good night, God bless, goodbye, and I'll see you next time. Bye now. Incredible, incredibly evil and sick and sinful. But we're not done yet, so if you want to catch up with more Without Lies Islam Dies, I'll see you back here tomorrow at 7:15. Until then, God bless, and I'll see you next time.